Welcome back. Should we buy or sell Novavax? First off, read this disclaimer carefully. And do your good deed of the day by liking and subscribing. So, it is under a megatrend that I call pandemics. 1.6 from the 52-week low, minus 63% pullback. This theme was a monster performer, bullishly, during, the big days of the lockdowns, but it corrected very, very, very substantially. When we look here at Novavax, we do see that it's at 21% from the low, a 73% pullback. It's definitively seen a very substantial correction. Novavax, so advancing the next generation of revolutionary vaccines. So we are committed to delivering novel products that leverage our innovative proprietary recombinant nanoparticle vaccine technology to prevent a broad range of infectious diseases. So this company is not like a one-trick pony in terms of, what we saw during the pandemic. And that is, of course, interesting. So when we look here at the pipeline, then you see that, of course, you have C19, but you also have seasonal influenza, respiratory syncytial virus, Ebola, Middle East respiratory syndrome, severe acute respiratory, like SARS. So this is broad, and that is, of course, good. So here is the stock chart. So weekly data points. So this stock has definitively been on a bunch of big moves all over the place. Huge rallies, huge sell-offs. We do see that there are some rather reliable time cycles here. Rise, decline, rise, decline, rise, decline. So these time cycles have been really good at sort of putting you on the right side of momentum. The problem in terms of the time cycle here is that we do see that the time cycle projects weakness heading into September of 2023. Based on how, clean the time cycles have been, it is an issue for the bulls. But the big but is that when this one has mean reversions to the upside, they are big. So let's just measure a few of them here. If we take this mean reversion here as an example, all of a sudden you have 70%. If we take this one, so you have primary a downtrend here, but here you have some mean reversion, and all of a sudden you have a 102% rally. So you see that throughout the history of this stock, it has a tendency to form these head and shoulders patterns during a pullback. So you have like shoulder, head, and a shoulder. And when you form that right shoulder, it does come in the form of an initial rally. If we look at this, you have a left shoulder, you have a massive head, and given, the track record of this stock, there's a pretty decent chance that it will form a right shoulder, which means that there could be some interesting times for bulls ahead. When we look back here as well, you see that head and shoulder-ish pattern, even here. So this one has a very strong history of this happening. What is further interesting for the bulls, at least temporary, is this red 200-week moving average. It has been clean resistance in the past, in the red arrows, but also a pretty decent support in terms of the blue arrows. Not as clean, but there's obviously something going on with that support level. When we zoom in a bit, we see that we are currently testing that super important moving average. Here, surgical support. Last week, almost surgical support. This week is, of course, still not completed, but we do have the action at that key moving average. So that is definitively something that could help form the right shoulder. Another interesting thing is that we do have horizontal support as well, back here. So that is, another thing that could benefit the bulls. When we go here to the daily data points, we do see that we don't really have much in terms of support from moving averages here. We do have this horizontal support though. When we look at these other indicators, like that, we see that, the sell-off in terms of what has happened to the MACD, it is at, one of the lowest, well, I think it is maybe a record. No, almost a record. So we have a very rare reading in terms of the distance from the purple 20-week moving average and also the 50-week moving average. We have rare oversold readings. RSI has unfortunately been lower in the past, and that is something that one would expect given what we saw with the time cycles. When we go here to the daily data points, we do see a similar message. We have really been through some heavily oversold readings, but we have been in an even more worse condition before, which fits neatly with the time cycles. So in terms of the technicals, given the history of this stock, how it usually trades, there's a pretty good likelihood that the time cycle will play itself out. But the big but is that it has a strong tendency, as we saw, to have mean reversions during a downtrend, and those mean reversions were huge percentage-wise. So the current setup, it is likely to be beneficial temporarily for the bulls. Here is the seasonality data we have on this stock. To the right here, you see the average over the last 5, 7, and 10 years. So when we start here with the last 5 years, you do see that February here to the left, it usually is a decent month, closing higher 60% of the time with a 7.5% average gain. Looking at these averages to the right, you do see that generally speaking, there's a tendency for there to be strength here heading towards March, then some weakness, and then a substantial strength here from late April heading towards early July. To the left here, if you look at the last 10 years, February is strong, March is typically weak, but then you have this substantial strength here towards May and June. Then the last 20 years. And then February is actually the strongest month, meaning it is the month which has the highest likelihood of closing higher than the price opened. So 60%, average 4.7% gain, which is also on the higher end of this spectrum. So February is literally one of the best months for Novavax, which is bullish. Then let's just quickly get some data here from Finviz. I'm especially interested to see whether it is optionable, and yes, it is optionable. Okay, when we go here to SAX, we see that it is a number 3 hold, but it has an A value, B growth, and A momentum. So the style scores are really, really good. Industry rank, bottom 46%, medical, biomedical, and genetics. Market cap, $606 billion US dollars. No dividend at all. When we go to insider activity, if we can get, well, can't we get any insider activity? Okay, so we do not get any insider activity here. Okay, let's look at some price targets then. So let's here go to the consensus estimates. So 7 analysts are covering the stock. The average price target is 190% above the stock price. Highest is 293% above. The lowest is 87.2% above. So the price targets here are definitively corroborating what SAX means in terms of value and growth. Okay, so the fundamentals here are definitively in the bullish camp. When we look at correlations, long term, 82% with S&P 500, 89% with the ARK Genomics ETF, and then we have 83% positive with Moderna. Looking at daily data points, short term, minus 17% with S&P 500, 81% with ARK G, and 94% with the germ ETF, and that is the infectious diseases ETF. And then we have 85 with Moderna. So let's do a quick technical analysis of ARC-G, because that is the one where we have data both short and long term. So what happens with ARC-G is very likely to have a significant effect on Novavax. So here you can see the chart. We have definitively seen a very, very substantial pullback here. So there's no risk here in getting in at the highs. So we do see a pattern that we saw with Novavax. You could make the case that we have something that looks a bit double bottom-ish here. It is not a clear double bottom, but it is a double bottom nonetheless. So that is interesting. It is happening at a relatively similar level down here. The problem is that the 200-week moving average is a very clear resistance level in this case. So what could function as support for Novavax is, in this case, resistance. The key thing, though, is that we have seen a very, very substantial pullback. If we look here at RSI as an example, the RSI we recently had the last time we had this RSI was back here. That was here. And that was an extremely good time to actually turn bullish on ARC-G. Distance from these moving averages reflected through the PPOs is also at very extreme oversold levels. On the daily data points here, in terms of the longer term moving averages, the previous time we had this distance from the blue 100-day and red 200-day moving average. You have this situation back here. That was a very key low. And also you had a situation back here, which is also similar to what we recently had. And that was also not it wasn't a bad time to turn bullish on genomics. So that is some interesting data. Let's now do some of those, the comparisons. So let's do it like this. We go big screen, and here is Novavax against ARC-G. So in this situation, we do have one of those classical technical patterns. This looks a whole lot like, it's a bit of a messy, but it is inverse head and shoulder-ish. You could also argue that it's a bit rounding bottom-ish as well, but basically it is a technical pattern that shows that there's been a shift from bearish to bullish sentiment. You could also further make a case, so let's draw that in, that we have something that looks a lot like horizontal support. So if you look back here, so you have support back here, here. So there's a bunch of support at the current level. So this basically means that there's an increased probability that Novavax will outperform the ARC-G, the genomics ETF. Then let's compare ARC-G against the S&P 500, like that. So in this case, we see that in the genomics ETF has substantially underperformed the S&P 500. Interestingly, we have seen the formation of a very key technical pattern, so let's draw that in. This looks a lot like a double bottom. You could also make a pretty decent case that we have some very substantial horizontal support back here, here. So a bunch of support levels that could benefit the bulls. So yeah, we have seen a very substantial pullback. Very, very substantial to support, which means that there is an increased probability that investors will compare the genomics ETF with S&P 500 and then see that there's an increased probability that genomics will outperform the S&P. So yeah, I think that there's time to sum up. Now, looking at the technicals, So it's a bit mixed. Long term, the time cycles were really clean. They strongly suggest that we could see weakness, overall weakness, long term heading into 2023. But there's a big but. We also saw that Novavax loves to have enormous volatility, both up and down. And recently it had this tendency to form these head and shoulders patterns, and that means that to form a right shoulder you need a rally. And the rallies, they can become very big. The technical support corroborates the probability of a rally. The fundamentals definitively corroborate that there's time for some rally. And when you look at the seasonality, that was also pretty decently bullish overall. And when we did the comparisons, against ARK G ETF, and also comparing ARK G with S&P 500, that also corroborated a more bullish thesis. And even beyond that, you did have the quick analysis we did of the ARK G ETF, the technical analysis. In that case, you did have that double bottomish formation, but the 200-week moving average in that case was resistance instead of being support. So that is just the thing. So 200-week is potential support for Novavax, but it is resistance for the ARK G ETF. There were some bullish points. There were bearish points as well, but I think that you can clearly see yourself that there's far more bullish points for this stock at this point in time. So yes, do I lean bullish or bearish? Of course, given the data, I lean bullish. But as always, use stops.